Blood splattered across Jalen Wright's jeans as the metal fork pierced his thigh. Passengers gasped, frozen in disbelief, while the flight attendant leaned down, his lips curling into a hiss. "Say a word, and you'll be the aggressor." The boy trembled, pain throbbing in his leg, fear locking his voice inside his chest. Silence smothered the cabin, as if everyone had decided it was safer not to intervene. The fork clattered to the floor, its metallic rings slicing through the hum of the engines. What the arrogant attendant didn't know was that every second was being captured quietly, relentlessly, by a phone camera just 2 rows back. And what he could never imagine was that Jalen's father wasn't just another quiet passenger. He was the new owner of the airline, seated in first class with a calm, unreadable face as he turned a page in his leather folder. The scent of lemon disinfectant mingled with recycled air, thick and oppressive. Jalen winced as the edge of the tray table grazed his knee, the pain burning deeper with every heartbeat. The attendant smirked, convinced he had silenced him. But this flight was already barreling toward a storm of justice that could not be stopped.
Welcome to Respect Wins Stories, the place where powerful tales come alive. No matter where you are watching this video from, whether it is New York, Texas, California, or anywhere across the United States, or even from the other side of the world, I would love to know where are you watching from today. Please share it in the comments below while you sit back, relax, and dive into a story that will move your heart and spark your imagination. Every story here carries a message, because in the end, respect always wins. Let us begin.
The fork's sting still burned in Jalen Wright's thigh, but he clenched his jaw and sat rigid, refusing to give the man the satisfaction of seeing him break. Around him, passengers shifted uneasily, some whispering, some averting their eyes altogether. Nobody moved to intervene. The flight attendant straightened his uniform, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve, as though stabbing a teenager had been routine. He leaned down again, his words sharp and venomous. "Keep quiet, boy. One word, and security will paint you as the problem." The arrogance was suffocating, filling the cabin like smoke. Jalen's fingers trembled as they brushed against his phone beneath the tray table. A flick of his thumb lit the screen, camera already rolling. The small red dot blinked, recording, capturing, preserving every cruel smirk and every threat. But the attendant wasn't finished. "Eat," he snapped, shoving the tray closer until the edge scraped Jalen's bruised knee. "Don't think you're special. I've dealt with your type before." His voice carried, sharp enough for everyone to hear. Yet he delivered it with the casual authority of someone convinced there would be no consequences. Jalen's chest tightened, shame prickling hot against his skin. But beneath it lay something stronger. Resolve. His father's voice echoed in his mind, words spoken years ago during boardroom lessons Jalen had overheard. Power isn't about volume, it's about timing. 2 rows back, a passenger shifted discreetly, holding their phone at just the right angle. Another camera, another witness. The evidence was multiplying. Meanwhile, in first class, Mr. Wright sat like a statue, his polished shoes crossed at the ankle, his leather folder open on his lap, eyes fixed not on the reports inside, but on the unfolding cruelty before him. He did not speak, did not flinch. He allowed the arrogance to stretch, allowed the man to reveal himself fully. Patience was the sharpest blade. The flight attendant, emboldened by the silence around him, smirked and raised his voice. "Steward, mark it down, this kid's disruptive. If he so much as looks at me wrong, I'll have him removed when we land." Another attendant nearby hesitated. "Should we confirm his seat?" "No need," the man snapped, waving dismissively. "He's nothing but trouble, trust me." The injustice tightened around Jalen like a vice, but instead of shrinking, he slowly lifted his phone from his lap, not hiding it now. The faint glow illuminated his face, steady and unflinching. The attendant froze mid-step. His confidence flickered for a heartbeat, then returned, angrier. "Put that away," he ordered, voice sharp. Jalen's voice was calm, barely above a whisper, but every word carried. "No." Gasps rippled across the cabin again. The boy who was supposed to cower had refused. The attendant's nostrils flared. He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a hiss. Listen here, you think anyone's going to believe you? I've been flying this airline for 15 years. You're just a kid. You'll lose. Jalen's grip on the phone tightened. He felt the heat in his leg, the sting of humiliation, but his gaze didn't falter. Not this time, he said softly. Up front, mister. Wright finally closed his folder, the sound snapping like a gavel in the charged silence. His eyes, sharp and deliberate, locked onto the man standing over his son. The balance was shifting. The trap was already set. The cabin had fallen into a suffocating silence. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, phones raised discreetly, breaths held. The arrogant flight attendant towered over Jalen Wright, fork still glinting faintly on the floor, his threats hanging in the air like smoke. Then came the sound that shattered the tension. Thwop, a leather folder closing in first class. Mr. Wright rose slowly, buttoning his dark blazer with deliberate precision. Every eye turned to him as he strode down the aisle, each polished step measured, each movement radiating quiet authority. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The entire cabin could feel the shift. Excuse me, he said evenly, stopping beside his son's seat. His gaze cut into the flight attendant like steel. Did I hear you correctly just now? You stabbed a child and threatened to brand him a criminal if he spoke up? The attendant's confidence faltered, but he quickly forced a smirk back onto his lips. Sir, you don't understand. He was being disruptive. I was... Disruptive? Mr. Wright's tone was soft, dangerous. He plucked the boarding pass from his son's trembling hand and held it up for the cabin to see. 3 amperes. Paid. Confirmed. Documented. The murmurs swelled like a tide. Phones clicked. Evidence stacked. The attendant swallowed, his face paling. Sir, I've been with this airline for 15 years. I know how to handle troublemakers. That's where you're mistaken. Mr. Wright's voice was still calm, but now it carried the weight of final judgment. He opened his folder, pulling out a set of embossed documents. With one flick, he turned a page outward, the company seal stamped in gold. You don't work for this airline. You work for me. The words detonated in the cabin. Gasps. A cry of shock, the whisper of disbelief spreading like fire. The boy's father owns the airline. The attendant's mouth opened, but no words came. His jaw trembled, sweat gathering at his brow. I acquired controlling shares of this airline last quarter, Mr. Wright continued, his eyes never leaving the man's paling face. I know every employee on record, every complaint, every lawsuit, and I assure you, this will be your last flight. The head flight attendant, who had lingered nearby in stunned silence, stammered. Mr. Wright, we had no idea. That's precisely the problem. Mr. Wright cut in, his gaze shifting briefly to the crew. You didn't bother to check facts. You didn't look at a ticket. You didn't listen. Instead, you let arrogance dictate your judgment. And you endangered my son in the process. Jalen lifted his phone slightly higher. The red recording dot gleamed. Uploaded. Protected. Immutable. The attendant staggered back a step, words tripping over themselves. I didn't mean... You didn't mean to get caught, Mr. Wright corrected, voice low. You meant every insult, every threat, every stab. He leaned in, eyes narrowing. And now, the world will see them too. Passengers clapped softly, then louder, until the entire cabin echoed with applause. The humiliation washed over the attendant's face like a tide, draining the last of his arrogance. Mr. Wright placed a steady hand on Jalen's shoulder. You're safe, he said quietly. His voice now meant only for his son. Then, turning back to the crew, he gave his verdict. Ground this flight. This man will not travel another mile under my command. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom a moment later. Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, this aircraft will be returning to the gate. Phones recorded. Passengers murmured. The arrogant attendant's world was crumbling. Piece by piece, mile by mile. The plane taxied slowly back toward the gate, the engines humming low. But the cabin was alive with whispers and the glow of raised phones. Every passenger knew they were part of a story larger than a single flight. The arrogant flight attendant, once so smug, now stood trembling at the front of the cabin, his hands clenched behind his back. His polished shoes seemed too heavy for him, each breath sharp and ragged. Mr. Wright remained by Jalen's side, calm and composed, one hand resting on his son's shoulder. Jalen's phone was still recording, though now it rested on his tray table, its red dot a silent reminder that truth was no longer hidden. The captain stepped into the aisle, his expression tight with professionalism, but his eyes heavy with understanding. "Mr. Wright," he said carefully, "per your directive, we've alerted security. The passenger in question will be removed upon arrival at the gate. A full incident report will be filed, and corporate will receive notice tonight." Mr. Wright nodded once, a slow and deliberate motion. "See that it's thorough. My son will not carry this scar without accountability." A ripple of approval moved through the passengers. Some clapped quietly. Others murmured words of encouragement toward Jalen. A woman across the aisle leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "You were brave. Don't let them make you small." The head flight attendant, pale and visibly shaken, stepped closer. "Mr. Wright, on behalf of the crew, I apologize. I failed in my duty to protect your son, and I allowed prejudice to blind me." Mr. Wright's gaze was sharp but controlled. "Do better," he said simply, "for the next child who doesn't have a father in this cabin." The words struck deeper than any reprimand, leaving the crew member with lowered eyes and flushed cheeks. Moments later, the aircraft eased to a halt at the gate. Uniformed security officers boarded, their presence commanding but measured. "Sir," one officer said, gesturing to the trembling attendant, "you'll need to come with us." The man's arrogance shattered completely as he stumbled forward, the stares and cameras of the passengers burning into his back. His protests were weak, incoherent. The very aisle he had strutted down in power was now a walk of disgrace. Applause erupted, louder this time, echoing through the cabin. Some passengers cheered, others shook their heads in disbelief. Justice had not just been served, it had been witnessed. Jalen exhaled slowly, his shoulders loosening as the weight lifted. His father gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "Dignity first, Mr. Wright whispered. "Always. You defended yours." As the security officers escorted the disgraced attendant off the plane, the atmosphere shifted. Relief, triumph, a shared sense of justice restored. The engines roared back to life, preparing once again for takeoff. But this time, the flight carried more than passengers. It carried the undeniable truth that arrogance, no matter how sharp, could be broken in the face of quiet, unshakable strength. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as the plane climbed back into the night sky, leaving the chaos of the gate behind. But inside, the air was different now, lighter, steadier. Passengers sat straighter, some still whispering about what they had just witnessed, others replaying the video that was already making its way across the internet. Jalen Wright sat quietly, his phone now locked on the tray table. The sting in his thigh pulsed, but the pain no longer defined him. What lingered instead was the echo of applause, the soft words from strangers who had told him he was brave. For the first time since the fork pierced his skin, he exhaled without trembling. Across from him, Mr. Wright studied his son with quiet pride. The boy who had been silenced by pain and fear had refused to crumble. He had held on to dignity, even when the world tried to strip it away. Mr. Wright leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "You didn't just endure, Jalen. You stood. That matters." Jalen looked up, his eyes reflecting both weariness and something brighter resolve. "I didn't think I could," he admitted softly. "You did," his father replied. "And you'll remember that every time someone tries to make you small, power isn't in what they take, it's in what you refuse to give." As the hours passed, the cabin grew quiet, passengers drifting into restless sleep. But Jalen remained awake, staring out the window at the stars scattered across the endless sky. He thought about the moment the fork hit his leg, the sting of humiliation, the fear that no one would believe him. And then he thought about the faces in the cabin, the strangers who had clapped, the passengers who had whispered encouragement, the woman who told him not to let anyone shrink him. Something had shifted, not just in him, but in everyone who had been there to witness it. When the flight landed, the story was everywhere. Headlines blazed. Airline owner's son stabbed by attendant. Entire cabin witnesses showdown. Clips of Jalen's calm defiance spread across social media. His quiet no replayed a million times. People didn't just see a victim, they saw strength. For Jalen, the days that followed were overwhelming calls, interviews, endless attention. But through it all, he held on to the lesson of that night. Dignity is never negotiable. Weeks later, when he walked with his father into the airline's corporate headquarters, employees stood straighter, eyes following him not with pity but with respect. He wasn't just the owner's son anymore. He was the boy who stood his ground. And as he walked past the glass walls and polished floors, Jalen felt it deep in his chest. The scar on his leg was real, but so was the fire it had sparked, a fire no one could extinguish. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself as his reflection glided across the glass, "They tried to ground me. Instead, I learned how to fly."
And that's another story shared here on Respect Wins Stories. If this one touched you, inspired you, or made you think, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us bring more powerful stories your way. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or state in the comments, and let's see how far these stories travel across America. Remember, no matter the struggle, no matter the ending, respect always wins. See you in the next story.